Sevastopol, June 1941. Dawn spreads over the city's bays, painting the warships of the Black Sea Fleet in gold. No one yet knows that in a few days, a war will begin that will turn this fortress city into a symbol of unprecedented resilience and courage. At the center of the upcoming events will be a man whose name will forever be linked with the heroic defense of Sevastopol, Vice Admiral Filipp Sergeyevich Oktyabrsky, a hereditary Volga fisherman who took his surname in honor of the revolution. He will become the soul and brain of the defense of the main base of the Black Sea Fleet. For 250 fiery days and nights, Sevastopol will fight in complete encirclement, repelling furious enemy attacks from land, air, and sea. Under Oktyabrsky's leadership, the city will turn into an impregnable naval fortress, where every stone, every curve of the coastline will become part of the defensive system. The Admiral will create a unique maritime bridge of life through which reinforcements, ammunition, and provisions will be delivered to the besieged city, and the wounded and civilian population will be evacuated in return. Filipp Sergeyevich Ivanov was born in 1899 in the village of Lukshino, Tver Governorate, into a family of Volga fishermen. From a young age, he knew the hardship of peasant labor and the harsh beauty of the Volga expanses. The river became his first teacher, shaping the character of the future naval commander, resolute, firm, uncompromising when it came to matters of principle. The October Revolution found young Filipp in Kronstadt, where he served as a sailor in the Baltic Fleet. The revolutionary events so deeply touched his soul that he later changed his family name Ivanov to Oktyabrsky, in honor of the turning point in Russian history. This step symbolically reflected his devotion to the new order and his desire to link his destiny with the future of the country. The Civil War became a true school of combat experience for Oktyabrsky. He fought on the Volga, participated in suppressing anti-Soviet rebellions, demonstrating outstanding leadership qualities and tactical thinking. After the end of the fratricidal war, Filipp Sergeyevich firmly decided to dedicate his life to the Navy. In the 1920s, he received a specialized education, graduating from the Frunze Naval School and then advanced training courses for commanding officers. The young officer's career developed rapidly. Commander of a torpedo boat, chief of staff of a division, commander of a division. In every position, Oktyabrsky demonstrated outstanding organizational skills and a deep understanding of naval tactics. His talent was particularly evident in mastering new types of warships. Oktyabrsky was one of the first to appreciate the potential of torpedo boats and submarines for future naval battles. In the 1930s, during the large-scale construction of the Soviet Navy, Filipp Sergeyevich commanded a brigade of torpedo boats in the Pacific Ocean. Here, he created a unique system for crew training, emphasizing coordinated actions, the initiative of commanders, and unconventional tactical methods. His approach to training sailors was ahead of its time. He demanded not blind adherence to instructions, but a deep understanding of naval affairs and the ability to make independent decisions in complex combat situations. 1939 became a turning point in Oktyabrsky's fate. He was appointed commander of the Amur military flotilla, where he successfully solved complex tasks to strengthen the country's far eastern borders. And in July 1939, Filipp Sergeyevich was appointed commander of the Black Sea Fleet. At 40 years old, he became a vice admiral and took command of one of the key fleets of the Soviet Union. Upon arriving in Sevastopol, Oktyabrsky immediately immersed himself in work. He personally inspected ships, coastal fortifications, and met with commanders of all levels. The new commander paid special attention to combat training. He conducted exercises as close as possible to real combat conditions, practicing the interaction of the fleet with aviation and ground forces. Anticipating the approach of a great war, Oktyabrsky persistently strengthened the air defense of the main fleet base, improved the system of minefields, and prepared naval artillery to support ground forces. A characteristic feature of the admiral was his exceptional demandingness, primarily of himself and then of his subordinates. He could be sharp, even harsh, but always fair. Sailors respected him for his professionalism, courage, and willingness to share all the hardships of naval service. In the spring of 1941, Sevastopol lived a tense but measured life as the main base of the Black Sea Fleet. Warships, lined up along the piers, regularly went out to sea for exercises. Coastal batteries practiced firing at naval targets. The roar of aircraft engines was constantly heard in the air. Naval aviation perfected its bombing and aerial combat skills. Behind this daily activity stood the firm will of the fleet commander, Vice Admiral Filipp Oktyabrsky. Anticipating the approaching war, he methodically prepared the forces entrusted to him for the upcoming trials. Oktyabrsky personally controlled the combat readiness of the ships, demanding from commanders not a formal fulfillment of norms, but a real ability to fight in any conditions. The admiral paid special attention to the air defense of the fleet's main base. He understood that in the event of war, enemy aviation would be the main threat to ships standing in Sevastopol's bays. By his order, anti-aircraft batteries regularly conducted training exercises, practicing interaction with fighter aviation and observation posts. Oktyabrsky insisted on strengthening the camouflage of important objects, creating false targets, and building additional shelters for ships. In May 1941, the commander conducted a series of command and staff exercises as close as possible to combat conditions. The scenario of these exercises strikingly resembled what happened a month later: a sudden air attack, mining of approaches to the base, attempts by enemy ships to break through. It was not just a test of the fleet's readiness, but also a psychological preparation of commanders for the harsh reality of modern warfare. When the Great Patriotic War broke out on June 22, 1941, the Black Sea Fleet met it in full combat readiness. Oktyabrsky received news of Germany's attack on the Soviet Union at 4 in the morning and immediately declared a combat alert. Ships were brought to Readiness Number 1. Crews took their places according to the battle schedule. Anti-aircraft batteries began their duty. On the very first day of the war, the admiral ordered the mining of approaches to Sevastopol and other fleet bases. This decision, made on the commander's personal initiative, played a huge role in protecting the Black Sea coast. German and Romanian ships could not approach Soviet bases, fearing to be blown up by minefields. Already on the night of June 23rd, Oktyabrsky organized the first offensive operation of the Soviet armed forces in the history of the Great Patriotic War. An attack on the Romanian port of Constanta to crusher, "0", and the destroyer, "1", shelled oil storage facilities and port structures, inflicting significant damage on the enemy. Although in this battle the Soviet fleet lost the destroyer, "2", which was blown up by a mine, the operation itself demonstrated the Black Sea Fleet's determination to act actively, not limiting itself to defense. In the following days, German aviation made several attempts to bomb Sevastopol, but met organized resistance. Anti-aircraft artillery and naval aviation fighters, acting according to plans developed under Oktyabrsky's leadership, shot down dozens of enemy aircraft. Not a single important fleet object was damaged. The commander personally led the defense from the command post located on the mine wall, not leaving it even during the most intense raided. In July-August 1941, When German troops rapidly advanced deep into Soviet territory, Oktyabrsky made a number of far-sighted decisions that determined the nature of Sevastopol's future defense. By his order, the construction of additional defensive lines on the approaches to the city began. Thousands of sailors and civilians dug anti-tank ditches, built pillboxes and bunkers, and installed minefields. At the same time, the admiral ordered the formation of marine infantry from the personnel of coastal units and ship crews. These Black Devils, as the Germans later called them, became the shock force in the city's defense. In the autumn of 1941, the situation in Crimea was rapidly changing. On September 11, German troops broke through the defenses at Perekop and pushed deep into the peninsula. Filipp Oktyabrsky understood that the fate of Sevastopol was being decided in these days. Upon receiving news of the breakthrough, the admiral immediately convened a naval war council. The decision was made quickly and unequivocally. Sevastopol would be defended to the last possibility, regardless of the developments on the peninsula. On October 18th, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet issued a historic order for the creation of the Sevastopol Defensive Region, SDR. This decision became a turning point in the city's fate. Oktyabrsky was appointed commander of the SDR, which allowed for the unification of all forces participating in the defense: ships, coastal units, aviation, and ground troops under a single command. Sevastopol must not be surrendered. Fight to the last man. These words of the admiral became the motto of the city's defenders. Oktyabrsky personally supervised the creation of the defense system, dividing the approaches to the city into 4 sectors. In each of them, strong points were formed, interconnected by fire support. Special attention was paid to artillery, the main striking force of the defense. At the initiative of the commander, coastal batteries were reinforced with naval guns removed from damaged ships. Powerful naval cannons of 120 and 152 mm caliber were installed on concrete foundations and integrated into the overall defense system. These improvised batteries played a huge role in repelling German attacks. Oktyabrsky understood that the key to a successful defense would be the interaction of the fleet with ground units. He developed a unique system for supporting troops with naval artillery. The battleship Parizhskaya Komuna, cruisers Krasny Kavkaz, Krasny Krim, and Chervona Ukraina regularly took up firing positions and delivered powerful strikes against the advancing enemy. To coordinate fire, the admiral created a network of fire correction posts equipped with radio stations. Naval artillery officers, positioned on the front line, adjusted the firing of naval guns, which allowed for exceptional accuracy of strikes. German troops watched in horror as large-caliber shells literally swept away their positions. Aware of the importance of aviation in modern warfare, Oktyabrsky paid special attention to the city's air defense. Anti-aircraft batteries were positioned to create a continuous zone of engagement over Sevastopol and its approaches. The fleet's fighter aviation received clear instructions for covering the most important objects. On October 29, German troops reached the close approaches to Sevastopol and began their first assault on the city. Oktyabrsky was at the command post during these days, directing the defense. He regularly visited forward positions to personally assess the situation and support the soldiers. His appearance in the most dangerous places inspired the city's defenders. The enemy's first onslaught was repelled. German troops, having suffered heavy losses, were forced to transition to a siege. This marked the first victory for the defense system created by the admiral. Oktyabrsky used the ensuing pause to strengthen defensive lines and replenish the garrison. By his order, fresh units, ammunition, and provisions were transferred to Sevastopol by sea. The Sevastopol defense system created by Oktyabrsky, became a model of military art. It combined the might of naval artillery with the tenacity of infantry, the maneuverability of aviation with the impregnability of coastal fortifications. Thanks to this system, the city withstood the first blow of German troops and prepared for new trials. At a critical moment in the defense of Sevastopol, Admiral Oktyabrsky made one of the most far-sighted decisions: to transform sailors into infantrymen. When in the autumn of '41, German troops were rushing towards the city and regular army units were catastrophically lacking, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet ordered the formation of naval rifle brigades. A sailor on shore must fight no worse than an infantryman, but better. These words of Oktyabrsky became a guide to action. Thousands of sailors and petty officers were removed from ships, shore units, training detachments, and schools. They were urgently retrained in the use of small arms, the basics of land combat tactics, and camouflage on the terrain. Filipp Sergeyevich personally supervised the formation of these units. He understood the psychology of sailors, their strengths and weaknesses. The main trump card of the Marines was their incredible resilience in defense and their furious impetus in attack. But they lacked experience in land battles, the ability to dig in, and to interact with artillery and tanks. To solve this problem, Oktyabrsky ordered the inclusion of experienced army commanders and instructors in the naval brigades. They taught yesterday's sailors the intricacies of land warfare. At the same time, the core of the command staff of the brigades consisted of naval officers, who preserved the special naval spirit of these units. The first to be formed was the 71st Marine Brigade, under the command of Colonel Zhidilov. It was followed by the 8th, 250th, and other brigades. Their distinctive feature was their black uniform, peacoats, flannel shirts, and capless hats. This uniform soon struck terror into the enemy. The Germans nicknamed the Marines Black Death and Black Devils. Oktyabrsky developed a unique system for transferring these units to besieged Sevastopol. From the Caucasian coast, Marines were delivered on cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and even torpedo boats. Each voyage was mortally dangerous. German aviation continuously attacked Soviet ships. The fleet commander often personally met the arriving reinforcements. He conducted short but fervent briefings, explaining to the sailors their tasks and the significance of the upcoming battles. Sevastopol is not just a city. It is a symbol of our naval glory. We, sailors, must defend it or die, said the admiral. The naval rifle brigades became the main strike force of the defense. Oktyabrsky skillfully used them in the most critical situations. When in December '41 the Germans broke through the defenses in the Makensievi area, it was the counterattack of the Marines that restored the situation. An important innovation of Oktyabrsky was the creation of a mobile reserve of Marines. These detachments were transferred to threatened sectors of the front by trucks, boats, and even trolley buses. Thanks to this, the city's defenders could quickly react to enemy breakthroughs, preventing the development of success by German assault groups. Filipp Sergeyevich personally developed the tactics of marine operations. He demanded that commanders make maximum use of the features of the fighter's naval training: the ability to navigate at night, to operate in small groups, and to show initiative. Night sorties and raids into the enemy's rear became the hallmark of the Sevastopol Marines. When Sevastopol found itself encircled by a blockade, the issue of supplying the besieged city became a matter of life and death. Admiral Filipp Oktyabrsky perfectly understood. Without regular deliveries of ammunition, provisions, and replenishment of manpower, the defense would inevitably collapse. It was necessary to create a reliable sea corridor under conditions of absolute enemy air superiority. a task that seemed impossible to many. "The sea must become our ally," the admiral said at a meeting of the fleet's command staff in November of 41. A plan for organizing sea convoys, which would later be called the quote, was already forming in his mind. Oktyabrsky developed a unique system for supplying the besieged city. Its core consisted of nighttime voyages by high-speed warships, destroyers, and leaders. They could reach speeds of up to 30 knots, allowing them to evade enemy aircraft. The cruisers, quote, and the leader, quote, became the main transports of this supply line. The quote, nicknamed the quote by sailors for its characteristic paint color, under the command of Captain Second-Rank Vasily Eroshenko, made 39 voyages to besieged Sevastopol. On a single voyage, it could deliver up to 1,000 reinforcement fighters or up to 200 tons of ammunition and provisions. To provide air cover for the convoys, Oktyabrsky created a special system. Fighters took off from airfields on the Caucasian coast and escorted ships along the most dangerous sections of the route. The admiral personally controlled the development of the convoy schedule, taking into account lunar phases, weather conditions, and intelligence data on enemy air activity. Filipp Sergeyevich paid particular attention to camouflage. By his order, supply ships were repainted in dark colors, and convoy movements were planned predominantly on moonless nights. Special routes were developed, allowing maximum use of coastal waters where it was more difficult for German pilots to detect Soviet vessels. When the enemy intensified aerial reconnaissance and increased attacks on convoys, Oktyabrsky made an unconventional decision: to use submarines to supply Sevastopol. Submarines took on board the most valuable cargo: medicines, small arms ammunition, radio parts. This delivery method was slow but practically guaranteed the safety of the cargo. To coordinate the entire supply system, the admiral created a special headquarters led by an experienced naval officer, Captain First Rank Nikolai Abramov. The headquarters monitored convoy movements around the clock, adjusted routes when conditions changed, and organized the rescue of crews from damaged ships. The sailors of the transport vessels displayed genuine heroism. The transport, quote, under the command of Captain Mikhail Bymester, made 20 voyages to the besieged city. During its last voyage in June of 42, the ship was subjected to a massive attack by German bombers. After receiving several direct hits, the quote began to sink. The captain ordered the crew to save themselves, but he himself remained on the bridge and perished with the ship. During the defense of Sevastopol, over 100,000 tons of cargo were delivered, and about 200,000 people were transported via the quote 9. These figures speak to the scale of the operation organized by Admiral Oktyabrsky. A special page in the history of supplying besieged Sevastopol is made up of the voyages of small vessels, fishing boats, schooners, motorboats. On Oktyabrsky's initiative, an entire flotilla of such vessels was created. They used their small size as an advantage. Small vessels were harder to detect from the air, and they could travel close to the shore, using terrain features for camouflage. In April of 42, when the Germans began a new offensive on Sevastopol, the intensity of the city's sea supply reached its peak. Oktyabrsky personally controlled every voyage, often meeting arriving ships at the piers. He understood that not only the combat capability of the garrison, but also the morale of the city's defenders depended on the uninterrupted supply. When the situation in Sevastopol became critical in June of 42, the sea bridge became the only link connecting the city with the mainland. In these last weeks of defense, Admiral Oktyabrsky displayed exceptional courage and composure, continuing to organize the city's supply even under conditions of continuous bombing and shelling. In besieged Sevastopol, every human life was priceless. The issue of saving wounded soldiers and civilians was particularly acute. Admiral Oktyabrsky, understanding this, created a unique evacuation system that worked even in the most difficult blockade conditions. Every wounded defender of Sevastopol must be given a chance for salvation. These words of the commander became a guide to action for the entire Black Sea Fleet. Initially, the main burden of evacuation was carried by cruisers and destroyers, which made regular voyages between the besieged city and the ports of the Caucasus. On the way back, after delivering reinforcements and ammunition to Sevastopol, they took the wounded on board. The leader, Tashkent, could evacuate up to 2,000 people in one trip. However, with the intensification of enemy bombardments, using large ships became increasingly dangerous. Filipp Sergeyevich made a bold decision to use submarines for evacuation. This was an unprecedented case in the history of naval warfare. Submarines, designed for combat operations, were transformed into rescue transports. Up to 80 seriously wounded people were placed in the cramped compartments of submarines. Commanders and crews of submarines showed miracles of ingenuity, equipping temporary places for the victims. The submarine Sh-215, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Grishilov, made dozens of such voyages. During one of them, the submarine was attacked by German anti-submarine ships. Depth charges exploded very close, lamps burst from strong jolts, glass shards wounded people. But the commander kept his composure, managed to break away from the pursuit and deliver the wounded to the Caucasus. Oktyabrsky personally controlled the organization of medical assistance for those being evacuated. By his order, doctors and nurses were on every ship involved in the evacuation. They provided emergency care right during the crossing. Special cabins were allocated for the seriously wounded, where urgent operations could be performed. With the onset of darkness, fast torpedo boats approached the piers of Sevastopol. These small vessels took 20 to 30 wounded on board and, at maximum speed, went out to sea to reach the Caucasian coast by dawn. The commanders of the boats showed exceptional skill, maneuvering between enemy ships and minefields. In critical moments of defense, when every able-bodied person counted, Oktyabrsky made difficult decisions about evacuation priorities. First of all, the seriously wounded, qualified specialists who could not be replaced, and children were evacuated. The admiral understood that saving future generations was an investment in the post-war revival of the country. The evacuation statistics are impressive. During the defense of Sevastopol, more than 120,000 wounded soldiers and civilians were evacuated by sea. Most of them, after treatment in hospitals in the Caucasus, returned to duty and continued to fight the enemy. In June of '42, when the position of the defenders of Sevastopol became critical, Oktyabrsky organized the last mass evacuation. On the night of June 26th to 27th, thousands of wounded, women and children were evacuated from the city. This operation was carried out under continuous enemy fire. Many ships and boats were sunk, but most managed to break through the blockade. The evacuation system created by Admiral Oktyabrsky became an example of naval art and humanism in extreme war conditions. It saved tens of thousands of lives and went down in history as one of the most successful rescue operations of World War II. During the heroic defense of Sevastopol, naval artillery became one of the decisive factors in containing the German offensive. Admiral Oktyabrsky, possessing strategic thinking, immediately recognized the potential of naval guns for supporting ground troops. "Our ships must become floating batteries," he declared at command staff meetings. This idea formed the basis of a unique fire support system unparalleled in global military practice. The battleship Parizhskaya Komuna, cruisers Krasny Kavkaz, Krasny Krim, Chervona Ukraina, and destroyers of the Black Sea Fleet transformed into powerful artillery platforms capable of inflicting devastating blows on enemy positions. Oktyabrsky personally developed the maneuvering scheme for ships at firing positions. Combat units of the fleet would put to sea in the dark, take up pre-calculated positions, and open fire on designated targets at dawn. Naval guns with calibers ranging from 100 to 305 millimeters unleashed a veritable storm of fire upon the enemy. German soldiers recalled these bombardments with horror. Russian ships appeared suddenly and turned our positions into hell, an officer of the 11th Army of the Wehrmacht wrote in his diary. The main problem with using naval artillery was coordinating fire. Naval guns required precise targeting, otherwise their power would be used inefficiently. To solve this problem, Oktyabrsky created a special spotters service. Artillery officers with radios were positioned on forward lines and directed the ship's fire. These individuals risked their lives daily under continuous enemy shelling, but it was precisely thanks to them that naval artillery operated with pinpoint accuracy. The cruiser, quote, played a special role in artillery support. Its 8 180mm guns could fire up to 60 shells per minute. In a single sortie, the ship expended up to 1,000 shells, destroying enemy tanks, artillery batteries, and troop concentrations. The cruiser's commander, Captain Second Rank Alexei Gushchin, masterfully maneuvered the ship, evading attacks from German aviation. Oktyabrsky constantly refined the tactics of using naval artillery. When the Germans learned to quickly detect the positions of Soviet ships and direct aviation at them, the admiral ordered the use of the fire raid method. Ships would approach a position at maximum speed, deliver several volleys, and immediately change location. This allowed them to avoid retaliatory strikes and protect the ships from damage. To protect ships from air attacks, Oktyabrsky developed a smokescreen system. Special smoke bombs, installed on small vessels, created a screen impenetrable to aviation, under the cover of which the artillery ships operated. This solution significantly reduced fleet losses from Luftwaffe strikes. The most impressive example of the effectiveness of naval artillery was the fighting in December 1941, when the Germans launched their second assault on Sevastopol. The battleship Parizhskaya Kommuna took up position in South Bay and opened fire with its main caliber guns. 305mm shells, weighing 400 kilograms each, literally wiped German positions off the face of the earth. After several days of such bombardments, the enemy's offensive faltered. The German command was forced to admit that it was impossible to take Sevastopol without neutralizing the Soviet ships. They transferred additional aircraft and heavy artillery to Crimea, including the famous 800mm 9 guns. But even under these conditions, the naval artillery of the Black Sea Fleet continued to operate, supporting the city's defenders. In the very heart of rocky Immerse, reliably hidden from enemy bombs and shells, was the command post of the Black Sea Fleet, the brain center of Sevastopol's defense. Admiral Oktyabrsky chose former quarries for the headquarters, an extensive system of tunnels and caves extending deep into the rock mass. This decision proved strategically impeccable. Even the most powerful aerial bombs could not penetrate the dozens of meters of monolithic stone protecting the command post. That's what the defenders of Sevastopol called this underground complex. Here, in spacious adits, working premises, communication centers, restrooms, and even a small hospital were equipped. Fleet engineers brought in electricity, installed powerful fans for fresh air supply, and ensured reliable water supply. In essence, it was an autonomous underground city capable of functioning even under a complete blockade of ground communications. Oktyabrsky's office was located in the central part of the complex. A modest room with a simple table, a few chairs, and a huge operational map on the wall. Here, the admiral spent most of his time receiving reports, analyzing the situation, and developing operational plans. Nearby was the conference hall, where the fleet's military council met daily. Filipp Sergeyevich established iron discipline and a clear work routine at the headquarters. Every morning at 7, an operational meeting was held, where the commander listened to reports on the front situation, the condition of ships, ammunition, and food supplies. After this, daily tasks were set, resources were allocated, and decisions were made on the most pressing issues. One of Oktyabrsky's main concerns was organizing reliable communication. A powerful communication hub was created in the adits, equipped with the most modern equipment of that time. From here, contact was maintained with Moscow, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command, the headquarters of the Caucasian Front, and flotillas in the Azov Sea. Special attention was paid to communication with forward units and ships at sea. By order of the admiral, a special group of liaison officers was created, who delivered orders to the front line and returned with reports on their execution. These officers, operating under continuous enemy fire, ensured live communication between the command and the troops, which was especially important in conditions of frequent damage to wired lines. Oktyabrsky's leadership style was characterized by a combination of demandingness and care for his subordinates. He could be tough, even harsh, when it came to fulfilling combat missions. The admiral immediately and ruthlessly suppressed negligence, cowardice, and inaction. At the same time, he always found time to listen to each commander, delve into their problems, and provide necessary assistance. The main thing is not to panic and not to fuss, Filipp Sergeyevich liked to repeat. In the most critical moments of the defense, he maintained amazing composure and clarity of thought. This confidence was passed on to his subordinates, instilling in them faith in ultimate success even when the situation seemed hopeless. One of the key elements of the command system created by Oktyabrsky was daily personal trips to the front line. Despite the enormous workload of staff work, the admiral considered it necessary to personally see the situation at the front, communicate with the soldiers, and assess the morale of the troops. These trips were extremely dangerous. German aviation and artillery continuously shelled the roads leading to the front line. At headquarters, everyone knew, if the admiral goes to the front, it means there is a critical situation. Oktyabrsky had an amazing ability to raise the morale of the troops with his presence. When we saw the commander next to us in the trenches, under bombs and shells, we became ashamed to be afraid, one of the defenders of Sevastopol later recalled. An important feature of Oktyabrsky's leadership was the ability to make unconventional decisions in critical situations. When, in December 41, German troops broke through to the North Bay and the situation seemed catastrophic, the admiral ordered some guns to be removed from the ships and installed on shore to strengthen the defense. This decision, contrary to all canons of naval tactics, proved to be salvific. The powerful naval guns stopped the enemy's advance. Organizing interaction between naval and army units became one of the most challenging tasks that Admiral Oktyabrsky had to solve. The defense of Sevastopol involved forces from two different branches of the armed forces, the Navy and the Red Army, with distinct traditions, tactics, and command systems. Unifying them into a single mechanism was critically important for the success of the defense. The fleet and the army must act as a single organism, Oktyabrsky said at joint meetings. We have no right to disunity when the enemy is at the city gates. Initially, Oktyabrsky's main partner in organizing the defense was Major General Ivan Petrov, commander of the Coastal Army, an experienced military leader who had gone through the harsh school of battles in Odessa. Their first meeting took place in October 1941, when units of the Coastal Army, retreating with battles across the entire Crimea, approached Sevastopol. The two commanders quickly found common ground, despite differences in their characters and approaches to solving military tasks. Petrov was a methodical, cautious strategist who preferred thorough planning. Oktyabrsky was more impulsive, prone to unconventional solutions and risk. These differences did not divide them, but rather complemented each other. Through joint efforts, they developed a unique defense system that combined the resilience of land frontiers with the firepower of naval artillery. Daily joint meetings at the headquarters of the Sevastopol defense region played a special role in coordinating actions. Oktyabrsky, as the senior in rank and position, chaired these meetings, but always carefully listened to the opinions of army commanders. Fundamental decisions were made collegially, taking into account all factors and capabilities. The admiral understood that land officers were better versed in the intricacies of infantry combat and trusted their expertise. Oktyabrsky's relations with Lieutenant General Dmitry Kozlov, commander of the Crimean Front, were more complex. Located on the Kerch Peninsula, Kozlov often did not understand the specifics of Sevastopol's defense and issued orders that did not take into account the real situation. Oktyabrsky was forced to repeatedly appeal to the Stavka of the Supreme High Command to defend his position. These conflicts demanded not only military but also diplomatic talent from the admiral. Major General Ivan Morozov, commander of the 25th Chapayev Rifle Division, became an important figure in the interaction system. His units occupied key positions on the approaches to the city, and the fate of the entire defense depended on their steadfastness. Oktyabrsky highly valued the fighting qualities of the quote and personally monitored the division's provision with everything necessary. Morozov, in turn, skillfully used the fleet's support, coordinating the actions of his units with the fire of naval artillery. To promptly resolve interaction issues, Oktyabrsky created a special group of liaison officers. Naval officers were sent to Army headquarters and Army officers to ships and naval units. These people spoke the language of both branches of the armed forces and could quickly resolve emerging problems. Organizing artillery interaction was particularly difficult. Ship guns had their own specifics, different from land cannons. To solve this problem, Oktyabrsky ordered the creation of a unified targeting system. Special artillery posts, equipped with radio stations, were placed on the front line and adjusted the fire of both ship and coastal batteries. This allowed concentrating firepower in the most dangerous directions. There were also conflict situations. Army commanders often demanded more ammunition than the fleet could provide. Disputes arose over priorities in the use of transport vessels, for transporting reinforcements or evacuating the wounded. In such cases, the final word remained with Oktyabrsky, and he made decisions based on the overall situation, not narrow departmental interests. In December 1941, during the second assault on Sevastopol, the interaction between the fleet and the army underwent a serious test. German troops broke through the defense in several sectors and created a critical situation. Oktyabrsky and Petrov jointly developed a counterattack plan in which the Marines, supported by the fire of the battleship Parizhskaya Komuna, were to restore the situation. The operation was successful, the enemy was repelled, and the defense line was restored. This success demonstrated the effectiveness of the created interaction system. Over time, cooperation between naval and army units became increasingly streamlined. Joint operations were planned and carried out as a single whole, without division into naval and army tasks. This was especially important in repelling massive enemy attacks, when it was necessary to use all available forces and means as effectively as possible. On June 7, 1942, an ominous sun rose over Sevastopol. The city, which had been heroically defending itself for 8 months, was preparing for a new trial. The German command had concentrated unprecedented forces against the fortress: 5 infantry divisions, 2 tank brigades, about 700 guns, and 1,000 aircraft. The last, most terrible assault on Sevastopol was beginning. Filipp Oktyabrsky met this day at his command post in the Inkerman adits. During the night, he had received alarming intelligence about a massive transfer of German troops to the front line. Everything pointed to preparations for a general offensive. The admiral convened an emergency meeting of the Black Sea Fleet's military council. Oktyabrsky declared, addressing the assembled commanders, "At 6 in the morning, German artillery opened a hurricane of fire on the city's defenders' positions. The earth trembled from the explosions of shells from super-heavy guns, including the famous an 800mm monster specially delivered to destroy Sevastopol's fortifications. The artillery preparation was followed by massive air raids. Wave after wave of bombers unleashed their deadly cargo on the defensive lines. Oktyabrsky immediately put into action a pre-developed counteraction plan. On his order, coastal batteries opened return fire, and fighters scrambled to intercept enemy aircraft. The cruiser Molotov and the leader Tashkent, maneuvering under bombs, fired on concentrations of German infantry and equipment. By noon, it became clear that this assault differed from previous ones. The Germans systematically destroyed one strong point after another, paving the way for their infantry. In some sectors, they managed to penetrate the defense to a depth of up to 3 kilometers. The situation was becoming critical. Oktyabrsky personally went to the command post of the Primorsky army to coordinate actions with General Petrov. The road was a living hell. Continuous bombings and artillery shelling had turned it into a chain of craters. Several times the admiral's vehicle miraculously avoided a direct hit. Oktyabrsky said, addressing the army commander. Petrov agreed with this plan. Together, they developed a flexible defense system, allowing limited forces to maneuver on a broad front. Special attention was paid to anti-tank defense, the main problem for the city's defenders. Upon returning to headquarters, Oktyabrsky ordered the formation of the last reserves. All sailors were removed from the ships, except for minimal crews. Assault detachments were formed from them and sent to the most dangerous sectors. The admiral understood that each day of defense came at the cost of enormous sacrifices. But he also recognized the strategic importance of Sevastopol, which was diverting significant enemy forces from other directions. By June 10, the defenders' position became critical. The Germans broke through the defenses on the north side and reached the shore of the North Bay. Now they could fire directly at the entire city and port. Evacuation of the wounded and delivery of ammunition became practically impossible during daylight hours. Oktyabrsky made a difficult decision: to begin preparations for the possible evacuation of command personnel and specialists, without whom it would be impossible to restore the fleet's combat capability. At the same time, he ordered the strengthening of the defenses of the last lines: Malakoff-Kurgan, Historical Boulevard, and Cape Chersonesos, where they intended to fight to the last. "We must save the people," the admiral said at the military council meeting. "Every experienced sailor, every skilled specialist will be needed to continue the struggle. But the evacuation must only be carried out at the very last moment, when all possibilities for defense are exhausted." On June 17th, the Germans began their decisive offensive. Under the cover of fire from hundreds of guns and continuous air raids, they attacked the last lines of defense. The city's defenders fought with incredible courage, but the forces were too unequal. By June 26th, the enemy reached the South Bay, splitting the defense into isolated pockets. In these circumstances, Oktyabrsky received permission from the High Command headquarters to evacuate command personnel. On the night of June 27, submarines, torpedo boats, and aircraft evacuated about 3,000 people: commanders, political workers, wounded, and fleet specialists. The admiral himself left the city among the last, flying out on a seaplane from Cape Chersonesos. This decision was incredibly difficult for him. For the rest of his life, Filipp Sergeyevich would remember those who remained in burning Sevastopol, continuing to fight without hope of salvation. But as the fleet commander, he understood that his duty was to preserve the personnel to continue the struggle for the future liberation of the city. By the end of June 1942, the situation of Sevastopol's defenders became critical. German troops, having breached defenses in several sectors, reached Severnaya Bay. The city turned into burning ruins under continuous bombing and artillery shelling. Filipp Oktyabrsky, at the command post in the Immerse tunnels, received a coded message from the Stavka of the Supreme High Command. In case of extreme necessity, I permit the evacuation of command personnel and the most valuable fleet specialists. This message placed the admiral before a severe moral dilemma. As a military leader, he understood the strategic necessity of preserving qualified personnel for the continuation of the war. As a man, he could not reconcile himself with the thought of abandoning thousands of soldiers who continued to fight heroically. "We are obliged to save those who tomorrow can return and liberate Sevastopol," Oktyabrsky said at an emergency meeting of the fleet's military council. His voice sounded muffled, his face gaunt from sleepless nights and the weight of the decision being made. On June 26th, the admiral issued an order to prepare for evacuation. All available submarines, several torpedo boats, and transport aircraft were allocated for the operation. The evacuation was carried out in strict secrecy so as not to undermine the morale of the remaining defenders and prevent panic. Priority was given to the severely wounded, then unit commanders, engineers, radio communication specialists, artillerymen, everyone necessary for restoring the fleet's combat capability. Each evacuee could take only personal weapons and documents. Oktyabrsky personally oversaw the process at Cape Chersonesos, the last sliver of Sevastopol land remaining in the hands of the defenders. Here, on a small patch of shore, under continuous bombing and shelling, the loading onto submarines and boats took place. "Comrade Admiral, it's time for you," reported Fleet Chief of Staff Rear Admiral Eliseyev at dawn on June 29th. Oktyabrsky silently looked at the burning city he had defended for 8 long months. His eyes were dry, but an unbearable pain was frozen within them. The admiral flew to Novorossiysk on an MBR-2 seaplane. Before his departure, he gave his last order: "Continue the fight by all available means. If further resistance is impossible, break through in small groups into the mountains to join the partisans." The decision to evacuate command personnel drew conflicting assessments from both contemporaries and historians. Many saw this step as abandoning comrades in arms. Others understood the strategic necessity of preserving experienced personnel for the continuation of the war. Oktyabrsky himself suffered greatly from these events. According to eyewitnesses, upon arriving in Novorossiysk, he locked himself in his office and accepted no one for several hours. The admiral understood that he had left a part of his soul in Sevastopol and that this city would forever remain an unhealing wound in his heart. Later, in a memo to People's Commissar of the Navy Kuznetsov, Oktyabrsky wrote, "Despite the evacuation of the command, many defenders of Sevastopol continued to fight to the last bullet. Isolated pockets of resistance at Cape Chersonesos held out until July 12th, 2 weeks after Oktyabrsky's departure. These people knew there was no hope of rescue, but they fulfilled their military duty to the end. After the fall of Sevastopol, Admiral Oktyabrsky was appointed commander of the Amur military flotilla. Many perceived this transfer as a demotion, a peculiar punishment for surrendering the main base of the Black Sea Fleet. However, in March 1943, Filipp Sergeyevich returned to the Black Sea, once again leading the fleet during a critical period of the war. By this time, the strategic situation on the southern sector of the front had drastically changed. Soviet troops, having routed the Germans near Stalingrad, were developing an offensive in the North Caucasus. The Black Sea Fleet received a new task: to support the advancing units and prevent the evacuation of German troops by sea. Oktyabrsky immediately began reorganizing the fleet. The experience of defending Sevastopol had not been in vain. The admiral perfectly understood how to organize the interaction between the fleet and ground units. Under his leadership, a system of naval support for advancing troops was created, which included artillery strikes by ships, landing of tactical amphibious assaults, and blockading enemy coastal communications. Oktyabrsky paid special attention to the preparation of amphibious operations. He personally developed landing plans, selected ships and marine infantry units, and supervised the training of the landing forces. The admiral understood that sudden strikes from the sea could play a decisive role in the liberation of Crimea. In November 1943, the Kerch-Eltigen operation began, the first major attempt to return to Crimea. Ships under Oktyabrsky's command ensured the landing of amphibious forces in the Kerch area and the village of Eltigen. Despite the storm and enemy resistance, the sailors managed to deliver thousands of soldiers ashore, creating bridgeheads on the eastern coast of the peninsula. The operation took place under exceptionally difficult conditions. German aviation continuously attacked Soviet ships, and coastal batteries maintained intense fire on the landing forces. Oktyabrsky was on the flagship, personally directing the fleet's actions. His composure and determination inspired the sailors, forcing them to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Eltigen landing, despite the heroism of its participants, could not develop its success and was evacuated. However, the Kerch bridgehead was held and expanded. It became an important stronghold for the subsequent liberation of Crimea. In the winter of 1944, Oktyabrsky actively prepared the fleet for the decisive operation to liberate the peninsula. Ships regularly went out for exercises, practicing interaction with aviation and ground forces. Special attention was paid to the preparation of torpedo boats and minesweepers. They were to ensure passages for landing craft through minefields. On April 8, 1944, the Crimean offensive operation began. Troops of the 4th Ukrainian Front and the separate coastal army, with the support of the Black Sea Fleet, launched a decisive offensive. Ships under Oktyabrsky's command secured the flanks of the advancing troops, landed tactical amphibious assaults, and struck enemy communications. When Soviet troops approached Sevastopol, a special moment arrived for the admiral. The city he had been forced to leave 2 years earlier was now to be liberated. Oktyabrsky personally developed a plan for the naval blockade of Sevastopol to prevent the evacuation of German troops by sea. On May 9, 1944, Sevastopol was liberated. Filipp Sergeyevich was one of the first to enter the ruined city. Eyewitnesses recalled that the usually reserved admiral could not hold back tears as he looked at the ruins of the once beautiful hero city. After the end of the Great Patriotic War, Filipp Sergeyevich Oktyabrsky continued his naval career, although the events of the heroic defense of Sevastopol forever left a deep mark on his soul. In July 1945, the admiral was appointed commander of the Danube military flotilla. a formation that played an important role in the final operations of the war. Here he was engaged in clearing mines from the great European river and ensuring the safety of navigation under new geopolitical conditions. The work was complex and dangerous. Hundreds of mines laid by retreating German troops posed a mortal threat to peaceful navigation. Under Oktyabrsky's leadership, Danube sailors defused more than 2,000 mines, opening the waterway for the restoration of economic ties between the countries of Eastern Europe. In March 1946, Filipp Sergeyevich returned to the Black Sea, once again leading the fleet with which the most heroic page of his biography was connected. Returning to Sevastopol was a deeply emotional event for the admiral. The city lay in ruins. Out of 5,000 buildings, only about 10 survived. Oktyabrsky actively joined the work to restore the main base of the Black Sea Fleet. On his initiative, sailors participated in clearing debris, restoring port facilities, and building housing for Sevastopol residents. The admiral personally supervised the work of raising sunken ships and clearing bays of mines and shells. During this period, another facet of Oktyabrsky's talent emerged: his ability to work with civilian authorities and the population. He established close contacts with the city leadership, coordinating the efforts of the fleet and local authorities in restoring Sevastopol. Thanks to this cooperation, the city revived faster than the most optimistic forecasts suggested. Filipp Sergeyevich paid special attention to preserving the memory of the heroes of the defense. At his insistence, the creation of the diorama Assault on Sapun Mountain began, and the first monuments to the city's defenders were erected. The admiral often met with veterans, recording their memoirs, which later became invaluable historical evidence. In August 1948, Oktyabrsky was transferred to the position of commander of the 4th Naval Fleet in the Baltic. This appointment coincided with the beginning of the Cold War and the increasing strategic importance of the Baltic direction. Here, the admiral was engaged in strengthening the naval defense of the country's western borders, introducing new technologies and armaments, and training personnel for the modern fleet. In the Baltic, Oktyabrsky's best qualities as a peacetime military leader were manifested: his foresight, understanding of the prospects for the development of naval affairs, and ability to work with young officers. He created an effective system for training crews, focusing on mastering complex equipment and developing tactical thinking in commanders. In the early 1950s, Filipp Sergeyevich's career took a new turn. He was transferred to Moscow to work in the central apparatus of the Navy. Here, the admiral dealt with issues of strategic planning, the development of new models of naval equipment, and the preparation of guiding documents for the fleet. His rich combat experience and deep understanding of naval strategy were in demand at the highest level of the country's military leadership. During this period, Oktyabrsky actively participated in the creation of the country's missile and nuclear shield. Understanding that the future of the fleet was connected with new technologies, he supported the development of the first sea-based ballistic missiles, nuclear submarines, and anti-ship missile systems. Many of his ideas were implemented after his retirement from active service. The attitude towards Admiral Oktyabrsky in the naval environment was ambivalent. Many admired his courage and talent as a naval commander, shown during the defense of Sevastopol. Others criticized the decision to evacuate the command staff in the last days of the defense. Filipp Sergeyevich himself never publicly commented on these disputes, believing that time and history would put everything in its place. The official assessment of Oktyabrsky's merits by the Soviet leadership was high. Over the years of service, he was awarded 4 Orders of Lenin, 3 Orders of the Red Banner, Orders of Ushakov and Nakhimov of the first degree, and many medals. In 1958, he was awarded the title of Admiral, the highest naval rank at that time. Filipp Sergeyevich spent the last years of his active service as the head of the Nakhimov Black Sea Higher Naval School in Sevastopol. For him, this appointment was a symbolic return to the city with which the brightest page of his biography was associated. Here, the admiral passed on his richest experience to a new generation of naval officers, instilling in them a love for the fleet and devotion to the motherland. In 1960, Oktyabrsky retired due to health reasons. He spent the last years of his life in Sevastopol, the city he defended and restored, which became truly native to him. Despite his advanced age and health problems, the admiral remained active, met with young people, worked on memoirs, and consulted historians studying the defense of Sevastopol. The name of Filipp Oktyabrsky is forever inscribed in the heroic annals of the defense of Sevastopol. Today, decades after those tragic and great events, historians and military analysts continue to study the phenomenon of the admiral who managed to organize an unparalleled defense of the city under conditions of complete encirclement and overwhelming enemy superiority in forces and means. Modern researchers evaluate Oktyabrsky's role ambiguously, but most agree on the main point. His strategic decisions allowed Sevastopol to hold out for 250 days, tying down significant enemy forces in the southern direction. Professor of the Naval Academy Nikolai Cherkashin notes in his monograph, the created by the admiral, a system for supplying the besieged city by sea, is especially highly valued. Military historian Igor Kozlov writes, "The question of the evacuation of the command staff in the last days of the defense remains debatable. Some researchers criticize this decision, believing that the commander should have shared the fate of his subordinates. Others point to the strategic necessity of preserving experienced personnel for the continuation of the war." Oktyabrsky himself suffered greatly from this moment until the end of his life, considering it the most difficult decision in his career. The memory of Admiral Oktyabrsky is carefully preserved in modern Russia, especially in Sevastopol and on the Black Sea Fleet. In the hero city, one of the central streets is named after Filip Sergeyevich, and a memorial plaque is installed on the house where he lived. In 2000, a monument to the admiral was unveiled in Sevastopol, a bronze figure on a granite pedestal. Oktyabrsky is depicted in full height, in admiral's uniform, with binoculars in hand. As the city's defenders remembered him, decisive, collected, ready for action. An exhibition dedicated to the life and activities of the admiral has been created in the Black Sea Fleet Museum. His personal belongings, documents, photographs, and awards are presented here. Of particular interest are the manuscripts of Oktyabrsky's memoirs, which he wrote in the last years of his life. These materials have become an invaluable source for historians studying the defense of Sevastopol. The name of Filipp Oktyabrsky is borne by a large anti-submarine ship of the Black Sea Fleet. This is a modern combat ship equipped with the latest weapon systems and electronic equipment. The ship's crew sacredly honors the memory of the admiral, upholding the high traditions of naval brotherhood and combat skill. In Russian naval educational institutions, Oktyabrsky's command experience during the war is studied. Special attention is paid to his methods of organizing interaction between the fleet and ground forces, the system of sea transportation under blockade conditions, and the use of ship artillery to support the defense. This experience remains relevant in modern conditions. Annually, on the Admiral's birthday, October 16th, commemorative events are held on the Black Sea Fleet. Officers and sailors lay flowers at the Oktyabrsky Monument, and solemn formations and meetings with veterans are held. In Sevastopol schools, lessons of courage are held, dedicated to the feat of the city's defenders and the admiral's role in organizing the defense. The legacy of Filipp Oktyabrsky is of great importance for the modern Black Sea Fleet. His strategic ideas, leadership methods, and ability to find unconventional solutions in critical situations are studied by current commanders. Admiral Igor Kasatonov, who commanded the Black Sea Fleet in the 90s, noted, "Filipp Sergeyevich Oktyabrsky died on July 8, 1969 in Sevastopol. He was buried in the Communard Cemetery next to other heroes of the city's defense. His grave has become a place of pilgrimage for all who are interested in the history of the Great Patriotic War and the Black Sea Fleet. Time has no power over the memory of great people. The further the events of the heroic defense of Sevastopol recede from us, the brighter the role of Admiral Oktyabrsky in this epic of courage and steadfastness shines. His name will forever remain a symbol of fidelity to military duty, selfless love for the motherland, and the highest professionalism."